Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nazir Daf Yud Aleph. Today's daf is sponsored by Caroline Ben Ari in honor of the 30th anniversary of the first time I read Torah, of the special birthday of my daughter Alana, and of Tu B'Shvat Chag LaIlanot. Today's daf is sponsored by Terry Kervosha in memory of her father, Nachum Meir Ben Malka, on his second yurtzai, Yehi Zichro Baruch, and in honor of the first birthday of her granddaughter and her father's namesake, Orly Nessa, daughter of Avi and Shana Herring. Today's daf is sponsored by Bluma Slitsky in memory of her father, Yitzchak Tzvi Ben Blima and Chaim Shimon. Okay, today's daf we're going to be learning a few quick announcements. Number one, if you want to register for the skills class, it's starting on Sunday. You can still register. You can learn it online on Sundays, or you can also learn it digitally on your own. The first shiur of Yafi Climber of On Second Thought, I'm a second Nazir is up, which is all about becoming a Nazir. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? As we discussed many times, she's going to do an in-depth analysis. It's an in-depth analysis of different Rishonim about this. And Gefet we'll talk about as we go through today's daf relating to one of the sugiyot we're going to learn, which is also an interesting topic. And we're going to start off with Mazgulo etakos. They pour someone a cup of wine. Va'amal hareini nazir mimenu hare ze nazir. Someone pours you a cup of wine. This is just like the Mishna in Arvei Pesachim, which says Mazgulo etakos. But there it's talking about pouring the wine for Leil HaSeder, and here it's talking about pouring wine in a regular situation. And your response is to say, I'm a Nazir from it. You become a Nazir. Now, if you might recall, we talked previously about somebody who says, I'm a Nazir, but I'm only not going to drink wine. And we had a machlok at the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon about whether this is a Nizirut or not. Did you accept Nizirut or did you not by saying that statement? Because why? Well, there is no such thing as a Nazir from one thing only. Nazir is a whole complete package. So the rabbi said, since there's no such thing, we accept this as a complete statement, even though you only said a partial statement. Rabbi Shimon said, no, there's no such thing, and therefore there's no such thing, and therefore this is a meaningless statement. Now here, they don't really seem to argue. And one of the reasons is because you didn't say, Hareini Nazir, and I'm only not going to drink wine. You said Hareini Nazir mimenu, which is a little bit general, from it. You didn't say from wine only, even though your reference was to wine. So it seems he doesn't disagree here, even though we're going to see the next Mishnah where he disagrees. But here he doesn't really disagree, and he would agree here that you really are accepting full Nazirut upon yourself. But there's a bit of a problem in this Mishnah, because the last Mishnah we talked about talking cows and talking doors. Now we're going to have a case where a woman was drunk. Ma'aseh sha'achat, and you'll see in a minute what the problem is here. There was a case of a woman, Shaita Shikora, she was drunk, Umazgula etakos, and they poured her a cup of wine. V'amra, hareini nazira mimenu, and she says, I'm a nazira from this cup of wine. Amru chachamim, lo nitkapna zo ela lomar, hareu alai korban. This woman, all she meant to do was to say, this cup of wine is forbidden to me. Why? Because she didn't want to drink anymore, right? Often you're sitting around, right? I'm sure this happens to you all the time, I'm just joking, but people are sitting around drinking and people are trying to egg you on. So if you say, I'm a Nazir from this, really meaning I forbid myself this cup of wine, well, then you can't drink it because, right, it's like saying when you're, they're bringing out cookies and you say, I'm fleishiks, right? I can't eat them. They're dairy cookies. So once you say it's forbidden to me by Torah law because I vowed against this cup of wine, then they're going to stop bothering you about trying to drink it. So therefore, now, what's the problem? Gemara immediately raises the problem. Are you bringing a story to contradict? The first part of the Mishnah said, if they pour you a cup of wine and you say, I'm a Nazir from it, you're a Nazir, complete Nazir. The woman who is drunk, we say she's not a Nazir at all. She's just forbidding that cup of wine. So, right, so are you bringing a story to contradict? Always when you have a case, an actual real case in the Mishnah, which happens, not all the time, but once in a while it happens, the question always is, what's the interplay of the case with the Mishnah? Okay, sometimes it seems to contradict, and then we have a problem. Maybe it really is coming to contradict. It's possible. It's possible they're giving you a halacha and then saying, but the story proves it's not true. But it seems a little bit strange. So the Gemara says, right, here's the contradiction. Amart Reisha Harez Nazir. In the beginning, you said, you're a Nazir. They're a Nazir. And then Hadran Tani Maseh B'Sha'achad, which shows she's not a Nazir. Alma B'Hayu Da'aser Hayen Achrin Ashari. It sounds like all she's forbidding herself is that one cup of wine. and all other wine is permitted, and obviously all other Nazirut issues are permitted to her. She's not a Nazir at all. To which the Gemara says, there's words missing in the Mishnah, and this is how the Mishnah should read. Regular case. Someone pours you a cup of wine, and you say, I'm going to be a Nazir from wine. From it, actually, you're a complete Nazir. But if you're drunk, and then the situation makes it clear what your intent is. Because when you're drunk, my time, what's the reason? Really, you mean to say, this cup of wine is forbidden. Well, then why didn't you just say, korban? Why did you say, Hareini Nazir mimena, if all you meant was Harei korban? You were worried that they were going to say, if you say this cup of wine is forbidden to me, what will they do? They'll bring you another one. All right, let's go back to the Fleischich example. You say, I'm Fleischich, I can't eat, I just ate meat, I can't eat your dairy cookies, so they'll bring you a Parv cookie, right? If you say I'm on a diet, then they're not going to bring you anything, right? So now it would make more sense. You should have just said, right? So now what's the issue? And therefore, therefore, I'm going to say something in this complete, I'm swearing off of wine forever as a Nazir, and that makes it clear I cannot drink wine. But you really didn't mean to be a Nazir. So now I just want to go back because the structure got a little cut off a little here, or confusing. Let me explain what we did. We started with a question. Does the story contradict? To which we said, no. Because really the Mishnah is missing words. And now we have to go back to what were the words missing, because what we did was we added the words that were missing. We didn't finish the Mishnah yet, which is what we're going to do in a second, according to the new reading. But we had this parenthetical line in the middle, which explained that line in the Mishnah that we added. So let me go show you what we just did. So I'm going back a few lines. This is the way the Mishnah should read. Nazir. So they poured him the cup. He says, I'm a Nazir from this. You're a Nazir. Here's the added line. But if he was drunk and he said it, it's not a Nazir, because again, the situation is indicative of what the person meant. This is again all about Nazirut. You could say the exact same thing, but the circumstances show what really you mean. Now we went into my taima, which was the Gemara going off to the side to explain that line. And now we get back to continuing the Mishnah. And then here's a case proving that extra line that we just added. That if you're drunk, it means something else. And here's a case where the woman was drunk and it meant something else. First of all, it's interesting just alone that there was a woman drunk and that they're talking about drunken women, kind of bringing that as an example. You kind of imagine in those days, it wasn't really the women who were drinking, but, could be women were drinking, obviously. And I wanted to point out a very interesting thing. The Rambam in the Perush HaMishnah has a different version. It's not shikora, which is she was drunk. It's shikolet. Shikolet milashon shakul. Shakul is a parent who lost a child. So it was a woman who was shakula, and that's why she was drinking, okay? Or that's why they were trying to get her to drink, kind of drink away your problems. And she said, no, I want to be in my sorrow. I don't want to drink to basically avoid my problems and avoid being in mourning. So that already has a whole different connotation. It's still the same thing. And in fact, the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah, when he quotes the Salacha, in Chol Nazirut, chapter 1, Mishnah 1, I had it open before, and I don't know where I left it. Anyway, he says there that he brings the example. He says, for example, if you're drunk or if you're in mourning, okay, and he brings both as examples, which is just interesting in and of itself, right? As if maybe both versions were an option for him. Okay, now we're moving on to the next Mishnah. So again, just to review, we had this Mishnah, which the structure of the Mishnah seemed contradictory. It was a case and then a story, and the story seemed to contradict the case and the halacha, to which they said, no, there's a trend. I would say the best way to say there's a transition sentence missing. And therefore, they added the transition sentence, and it all makes sense. Really, this kind of statement could be understood one way or the other, depending on the circumstances. New Mishnah. This will help if we go through the structure first, and then we'll review the structure after. We have 3 lines in the Mishnah. three different cases. In the first case, there's no machloket. In the second case, there's a machloket Rabbi Tanakama, Rabbi Shimon. In the third case, there's a machloket Tanakama, Rabbi Shimon. But in one, the rabbis are going to say you're a Nazir, and Rabbi Shimon's going to say you're not a Nazir. And in the second, they're going to reverse their positions. So the first question the Gemara is going to ask is, case number one doesn't have a machloket. Do Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis not disagree in this case? And there's going to be a machloket about whether they disagree or not. Then, because first of all, you could, if you notice, when they say this case is the halacha, then they say the next case, the rabbis say this, Rabbi Shimon says that. Theoretically, you could say that Rabbi Shimon's statement goes back to the first case as well. Possible to say that. So we're going to see two different ways of reading case number one. Is there a machloket? Is there not? Then we're going to go to resolve this apparent contradiction where in one, the rabbis say you're a Nazir and Rabbi Shimon says you're not. And in the other, it flips. You could think maybe they would agree on one case or something like that, but to have them actually flip positions entirely seems a bit strange. And we're going to have three resolutions to that problem. So now let's go inside and see the details. The words almanat generally are indicative of a condition. So you make a condition. I'm going to be a Nazir under the stipulation that I will drink wine or I will be impure to the dead. Now, you can't do that because that's not what a Nazir is, right? The Torah says you can't be a Nazir and become impure to dead people. So therefore, harez a Nazir, basor b'kulam. You're going to have to understand why you're a Nazir, okay? But you're a Nazir and you're forbidden to everything, meaning your condition is basically irrelevant. But we're left with, right, we kind of ignore your condition, but you're a Nazir. Okay, we'll get back to this more in the Gemara. Second statement, second halacha. Yodea ani sheyesh nizirut. It's similar to a structure we had at the end of Nidarim about, I know that there's Nidarim, I didn't know I could annul them. Similar kind of thing. Yodea ani sheyesh nizirut. I know there's a concept of nizirut. Aval eni yodea shanazir asur b'yayin. But I didn't know that the Nazir can't drink wine. Harei ze asur. According to Tanakama, you're a Nazir. In other words, you took upon Nizirut, and while you took it upon, you said, I know that's Nizirut, I want to be a Nazir, but I didn't know that the Nazir can't drink wine. In other words, after you took upon Nizirut, you claim, oh, I had no idea that a Nazir can't drink wine. So Tanakama says you're a Nazir anyway. Rabbi Shimon matir. Rabbi Shimon says no. Why? This goes back to what we saw Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis before. Partial Nizirut. You basically are saying, I only took on partial Nizirut. I took on not to be impure to dead people. I didn't take on not to drink wine, right? Or I took on not to cut my hair, okay? But not that. So Rabbi Shimon will say, that's only partial Nizirut, and partial Nizirut doesn't work. And the rabbis will say, what do you mean? Partial Nizirut is complete Nizirut. So what if you didn't know? You're a Nazir anyway. What about case number 3? You already know it's going to be the reverse. Rabbi Shimon's going to say you're a Nazir, and the rabbis are going to say no. Yodea ani shanazir asur b'yayin. I know that a Nazir can't drink wine, as opposed to the previous case. But I must drink wine. And I thought that because I must drink wine, which we don't exactly understand yet what this is, but because I must drink wine, I assumed that the rabbis would at least permit me. I could be a Nazir, but the rabbis would permit me to drink wine. I work for the Chevra Kadisha. My job is burying dead people. Of course, when I took on Nazirut, I assumed the rabbis were going. Now, it's not the same as saying I didn't know it was forbidden. No, I knew it was forbidden. But I thought that the rabbis would make a special dispensation and permit me to become impure to dead people. Harei ze mutar, the rabbis say, you're permitted. You're not a Nazir anymore. And Rabbi Shimon osir. Okay, this we don't yet understand why this is. So we'll hold off right now and we'll start. Now, as I told you, the first thing we're going to do before we get back to this case is try to understand case 1. And case 1, we said, Hareini Nazir, under the condition. I'll be a Nazir, but I'm stipulating that this is only going to be if I can drink wine or if I can become impure to dead people. Right? It could have been also if I cut my hair, either one. To which the Gemara says, why doesn't Rabbi Shimon argue in case number 1? Theoretically, it's the same idea. You're taking on partial Nizirut. To which Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Chalukaya Rabbi Shimon Apiration. Rabbi Shimon disagrees also with the ratio. In other words, as I said before, when it says Rabbi Shimon Matil, it's referring, in case number 2, it's referring back to case number 1 as well. And only in case number 3 right? It had to be mentioned in case number 2 because in case number 3, Rabbi Shimon switches position. So in case number 2, it comes to say both case number 1 and case number 2, Rabbi Shimon disagrees because both are different ways of saying I'm a partial Nazir. Either, right? Okay, and we'll get back to how he reads this line in a minute because we kind of said it was a stipulation, which is a little different, but we'll get back to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi in a minute. Ravina Amal, Bereisha lo palig Rabbi Shimon. He doesn't disagree in case number 1. Why? Because case number 1 is so obvious that you're going to be a full Nazir. Why? My timer. What's the reason? Mishum dahavele matne al ma shekatuv b'Torah. You're making a stipulation against what it says in the Torah. V'chol matne al ma shekatuv b'Torah tna'o batel. Anyone who stipulates something against Torah law, the stipulation is nothing, considered 0. So basically, you made this statement: I'm a Nazir under the condition that I drink wine. Under the condition that I drink wine is just eliminated because it's a statement where you're basically stipulating something against Torah law, which you can't do. And therefore, that part is meaningless. Now, what's left? You said Haredi Nazir. So there you have it. You said you're a Nazir. That works. Okay? That part stays. The stipulation is erased. Comes Tosfot and asks a very important question here, which is, I don't get it. Basically, you really didn't want to become a Nazir to forbid yourself from drinking wine. And that's what you stipulated. So even if we say, Matnal mashkatu b'Torah tzno batel, why don't we say your entire statement is meaningless? Because in the end now, you're going to be a Nazir without intent to be a Nazir. You didn't really intend to be a Nazir to be drinking wine, basically. And in other words, you didn't want it. You wanted to be able to drink wine. And now you're a Nazir and you can't drink wine. That's not really what you intended. So Tosfot asked this question, and that's really what Rabbi Shimon deals with in Gefet. She starts off with Tosfot's question, and from there gets into all sorts of fascinating topics about, it's a very in-depth, good, as we call it, an Iyun Shiur that really goes in depth into the case, which we're not going to do in Daf Yomi, but really gets into the nature of Maneh Mashkatu b'Torah and specifically in Nazirut, and how maybe Nazir, how does it compare to stipulations in Gitin, Kiddushin, marriage, divorce. Okay, it's a very interesting shiur, so recommended listen. So now let's stick with the Gemara though. The Gemara basically says, let's review right now. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says it's the exact same thing as the next case, and therefore there's a machlok at Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. Ravina says no. Everyone agrees in case 1 because it's so obvious. This is the classic case of Matneh mashkatu b'Torah. Rabbi Shimon doesn't disagree with that. You basically made a stipulation against Torah law, which you're not allowed to do. And therefore, let's put Rabbeinu Tam's question aside. We'll just go with the simple reading before we ask this question, which is that T'nai is null and void because you can't make such a stipulation. And therefore, your acceptance of Nizirut is still in place because it'll happen even without the condition. So now we're stuck with Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. If it's so obvious that this is Nizirut, how could Rabbi Shimon disagree according to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi? How could he say this basically is accepting partial Nizirut, and accepting partial Nizirut is basically considered nothing, and it's nothing. So to which they say Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Amar Lecha, he would answer, Hi, almenat kechutz dami. This is why I didn't want to explain it before. He says this isn't a stipulation at all. The words almenat in this context are understood as except for, not under the condition that or the stipulation that, but it means except for. It really means the same thing as, the next line really. Okay, which again, the next line, not exactly, but the case we saw before where someone accepts partial nizirut. And he just reads the words almanat, not in their usual meaning, which is I'm stipulating, right? If this happens, then I will be a Nazir. No, he says I'm a Nazir, except that I'm going to drink wine. And then it goes back to the classic Rabbi Shimon Chachamim debate, and that's his approach. Before we finish this section, we have a braita to prove Ravina. So we're going to bring another Tanaitic source, same time period as the Mishnah. Our Mishnah didn't say it was matneh mashkatu b'Torah, right? It didn't use those terms. The Ravina brought that in. But now we're going to have a braita from the time of the Tanaim that used exactly that wording about our case. And therefore it strengthens Ravina's position. Amal hareini nazir al menat she'ehe shotei yayin. If you say I'm a Nazir, this is exactly our case, under the stipulation that, right, if on the account, assuming I can drink wine, u'metamei l'meitim, or I can become impure to dead people, You're forbidden, you're a Nazir, and you're forbidden to all of them. Why? Because you made a stipulation that goes against the Torah. Anyone who makes a stipulation against the Torah, by the way, Rabbi Shimon also gets into all these issues about Tanai. What is a condition? What makes something a condition? That we always go back to the Tanai, B'nai Gad, and B'nai Reuven. Okay, next. Case number 2 and 3. Now we have to deal with, like I said, we're going to have the contradiction, which is Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis flip positions between case 2 and 3. How do we understand that? We're going to have 3 explanations. The first is the simplest, which is our classic when we have a problem like this. We say, oh, it's a mistake, and flip them back, okay? Flip one of them, and then we'll have no problem. So first, the Gemara is going to ask the question. Again, let's go through the cases just to refresh our memory. Case number 2 is, I know there's Nazirut, but I didn't know the Nazir couldn't drink wine, which basically means you accepted Nazirut without accepting the forbidden thing to drink wine. Rabbis say you're a Nazir because accepting partial Nazirut is complete Nazirut. Right? Again, remember, no one thinks that partial Nazirut means anything. So he says partial means complete. And Rabbi Shimon says partial means nothing. So that's why Rabbi Shimon is Matil. Case number 3 is, again, for our purposes, it's going to be 1 and 2, but I'll call them 2 and 3, just so that you remember them in the context of the Mishna. So case number 3 is, you said you're going to be a Nazir, but you said, I assumed the rabbis would permit me to drink wine because I have to, or would permit me to become impure to dead people because I have to. And then rabbis say you're not a Nazir, and Rabbi Shimon says you are a Nazir. So Harmart Reisha Asul Rabbi Shimon Matil. It's confusing here, right? The Reisha, again, the Reisha is going to be the first case, which really means case number 2, right? It's going to be 2 versus 3. So 2 is going to be called the first one, and 3 is going to be called the second one. So doesn't it say in the first part, Asul Rabbi Shimon Matil, and the second and the third case says the opposite? So switch it in case number 3 and say, case number 3 is saying basically the same thing as case number 2. The rabbis say you're a Nazir, because again, you thought you were taking upon Nazirut without including wine. You thought they would permit you wine. So that basically means you took on partial Nazirut. The rabbis see it as complete Nazirut, and Rabbi Shimon doesn't. So that's option number 1. Very simple. Option number 2, Ibai Deima, Lo Lan Loti. Don't flip the shita. Hatam, Reisha, and the Reisha, moving now to Amud Bet, Kigon de Nazir Mechada, you really forbade yourself from one thing. L'Rabbanan de Amre afilu lo nazar ela me'echat mehem abi Nazir. V'asul, l'Rabbi Shimon de Amar ad sheyazir mikulam mutar. This so far just explained what we already knew, which is, the first case is the classic case of, you only forbade yourself from one thing, or 2 things, but not 3 things, right? Whatever it is, partial. And that's the classic machloka we already saw earlier in the Masechet and discussed already today, which is, according to the rabbis, you said I'm going to be a Nazir from only one thing, you're a Nazir. Rabbi Shimon says you say I'm going to be a Nazir from only one thing, you're not a Nazir. Okay, that fits perfectly. Seifa de Nazir mikul. The Seifa is a different case. Okay? In the Reisha, let's just think about it in this way. You're not a Nazir unless, right? You made the statement. Question is, did Nazirut start or did it not? So the rabbi is saying, partial Nazirut, it started. Okay? Rabbi Shimon says, no, partial Nazirut never gets come. But the Seifa is a case where Nazar Mikulu. You actually forbade yourself, you became a Nazir. Then what happened? Itchil Mechada. Then you went to the rabbis and you said, I really want to get rid of this forbidden, I can't drink wine, I want to get rid of it. And in fact, I thought when I took, now here's, what do you do when you want to get rid of your Nizirut? You have to bring some sort of, had I known, I thought this, right? I was under a mistaken impression, and that's why I want to undo it. So what do you say? Okay, and I'm kind of paraphrasing the Rush and the way he explains this. He says, because it doesn't say too much here, Itchel Michada, you basically go and you say, listen, I thought when I took it upon myself that you would permit me, because of my situation, that you would permit me to drink wine, or you would permit me to be Mitame Lamed. I see now that that's not the case, that I have to be a complete Nazir. In other words, you accepted Nazir, thinking, though, that maybe they would permit you to drink wine. You realize now that they're not going to permit you, so you want to undo the vow because it's not exactly what you thought it was going to be. So now, why does this make a difference? Well, the point is here, you're already a Nazir. So now the question is, can you undo the Nazirut in this manner or not? So the Rabbanan, and now they're actually going to be consistent within their previous opinion, but they flip sides for the following reason. L'Rabbanan, we'll see in a second. L'Rabbanan da'amrei afilu lo nazar ela be'echat mehem habi Nazir. The rabbis say, when it comes to becoming a Nazir, I can become a Nazir if I only say I'm going to be a Nazir from wine. I'm still going to become a complete Nazir. Therefore, ki mitchel, now we're going to say, it's like we say, the beginning is like the end, okay? Going into Nazirut is the same as going out of Nazirut, which is ki mitchel michad minayu ishtere. If I go to the Chacham and say, listen, being a Nazir is hard because I really need to drink wine. Not that I really need to become impure to the dead and cut my hair and drink wine and I want to get rid of all of the Nazirut. You're basically saying I want to get rid of the part about the drinking wine. The question is, can you undo Nazirut in that way? Well, if you think that you can bring on Nazirut partially, then you can undo Nazirut partially. So therefore, here we're taking someone who's already a Nazir and wants to get rid of it. And the rabbis say, sure, you can get rid of it the same way you got into it more easily. You can get out of it more easily. And the Rabbi Shimon da'amar ad she'azir mikulam. But Rabbi Shimon says you can't be a Nazir unless you commit to all three prohibitions. He mitchel nami ma'ahu ad mitchel mikulu. When you go to say, listen, it's the wine that I really can't tolerate, and I want to get rid of this forbidden of drinking, I want to be able to drink wine. You can't get rid of it unless you basically want to renege on all of Nazirut. What you're really saying is here, I only want to renege on, I want to change my position on the wine part, but you can't do that because it's meaningless. Just like taking on Nazirut is meaningless unless you take on all three things. Getting rid of Nazirut is meaningless unless you get rid of, basically, go and do a she'elah, and I regret the entire thing. Okay, so Mishum Hachim Katani, Rabbi Shimon oseh. So again, to review so far, we're up to seeming contradiction between case 2 and 3. Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis switch positions. Option number 1, just flip the positions. Option number 2 is to explain the case a little more in detail. It was like they didn't give us all the details, which is you actually became a full-fledged Nazir. Then you went to the Chacham and said, listen, I thought that you were going to permit me. Now I see you won't. Now I want to get rid of it because I can't tolerate not drinking wine. And then, or I can't tolerate not being impure to dead people. Then what happens? So the question is this type of she'elah effective because it's only partial? And that will be, depending on whether you think going into Nazirut works in that way, getting out of Nazirut will work that way. And that's why their positions become flipped. Again, if you understand it from a different lens, you view it like this. When you're not a Nazir, the question is, do you become, right? And the rabbis say, yes, you become. And Rabbi Shimon says, you don't become. Once you're already a Nazir, the question is, can you get rid of it? And the rabbis say, yes, you can get rid of it. And that's why, right, it's all easier for the rabbis, easier to get into it and easier to get out of it. And that's why it becomes flipped. When you're out of it, you're in it, right? You become in, even in partial. When you're in it, you can get out of it very easily as well. And therefore, you're permitted in the second case. Rabbi Shimon says hard to get in and also hard to get out. So therefore, the first of case number 2, you're already in it. So I'm sorry, you weren't in it yet, so you don't get into it. So he's lenient. In case number 2, you're already in it, you can't get out of it. So he's going to be strict. Okay, next option. We have one more possibility left. Ibait ema. Now we have a case. What we're saying is, let's give an example. You said you're going to be a Nazir in a month from now. Okay? Take upon Nazirut starting in a month. The day before that, I get sick. And my disease, one of the best way to cure the disease is by drinking wine every day. So now I'm in an onus situation where I have to drink wine, but I'm forbidden to drink wine because the Nazirut took place. So now the question is going to be, right, how do we treat Nidrei Onsin? Now, you might write, this is a vow of onus now. The vow is going to kick in a way that I can't actually keep it. So is that a vow or is it not a vow? Does it require she'elah? Does not require she'elah? You might remember this was a machloket we saw in Nidar. So now we're going to see, Beplukta dishmo v'Rav Asi. The debate here is the same between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis, is the exact same debate in Nidarim that we saw between Shmuel and Rav Asi. Ditznan. The Mishna there said, Arba'at nidarim hitiru chachamim. The rabbis permitted 4 nidarim. Nidrei zeruzin, nidrei havayin, nidrei shkagot, nidrei onsin. The rabbi said all these nidarim don't need undoing. They're just not vows at all. So what are they? Remember, you were negotiating a price with someone. You said, this is gonna be forbidden to me if I, I'm definitely selling you this for $100. And you say, I'm definitely not buying this for more than 50. And you each vow while you're saying it to forbid something. If I drop my price, this will be forbidden to me. That's not a vow because it's clear you were both trying to get to 75 and you never really meant what you said. You were just using it as a negotiating tactic. Nidrei havai is if you say something totally absurd. So I'm a Nazir if, the sky turns green, something crazy. So that's a neder havai, a meaningless thing. Nidrei shkagot or nidrei onsim are very similar, and I'll explain them in the same kind of way, which is I said, I'm a Nazir. I'm sorry, not Nazir. Let's say we're talking about a neder. I say, this loaf of bread will be forbidden to me if I ate yesterday. So I'm sure that I didn't eat yesterday. And then it turned, or let's use an example if I eat tomorrow. Okay, it could be also yesterday, but the onus will be easier not. So if I eat, it won't work for onus, it'll work for shkaga. Like let's say I forgot that I ate yesterday. I thought I fasted and then I forgot that I ate something. That would be shkaga. Let's say I say, I'm going to be a Nazir if I eat tomorrow. I'm planning to fast tomorrow and I'll be not a Nazir, forget it, neder. This will be forbidden to me if I eat tomorrow, whatever it is. Then I forget tomorrow that I made the neder, and I ate. It's not, the neder doesn't apply because I didn't mean for it to apply. So I didn't mean for the condition to be filled. I just totally forgot that I made that statement yesterday. If it was honest, it would be someone forced me to eat. I really didn't want to eat, but someone forced food down my throat. They made me eat and it wasn't my doing. That's an nidrei onsim. So now, what do they say? The Mishna says they're not an neder. But Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav Asi, Arba'a nidrim halalu tzrichim she'ela l'chacham. Rav Asi said, you still need to go to a chacham to undo them. Why? Because, if you remember, we don't want people to say random statements and say real vows and not keep them. People, as they call it, yizalzelu b'nidarim. They won't take nidarim seriously. If we see that people can take these kind of ridiculous vows or meaningless vows, and you don't even have to undo them, other people will think they could take regular vows and not need to undo them, and they don't have to keep them. So in order to make sure that people don't unnecessarily take vows, we basically say, listen, this really isn't a vow, but you should go undo it with a chacham. This Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav Asi, and then he just explains the Kiamarita Kamei Shmuel. When I told Shmuel what Rav Asi said, Amar li, that's a ridiculous thing that Rav Asi said that. Tani katani hitiru chachamim, ba'at amar tzruchim she'ela l'chachamim. How can it be? It says in the Mishnah explicitly, the rabbis permitted these vows. You're going to say now you need to do she'ela l'chacham? So we have this machloket. Shmuel says it's in the neder at all, and Rav Asi says you have to undo it. That is exactly what our Mishnah is about, according to option number 3. And then this case has absolutely nothing to do with case number 2. It's a totally different case. It's not at all the same logic. This is a case where you took upon Nazirut completely. Then what happened? By the time it kicked in, or at this point, maybe even you took it on at that point, but now you have to drink wine because of some reason. It's onus. It's beyond your capability. It's out of your hands. You have to. So now the question is the neder just undone? Okay, or right, it would have to be the case I described where it only kicks in later. Because if it's already there, then I think that might be more of an issue. But here we're talking about a case where it never really became, because the minute it clicked in, you already had to drink wine. So now, Rabbanan Savrei Kishmuel, the rabbis hold like Shmuel, which is you need to do, right? You don't need anything. It's just not a neder. That's the simple reading of the Mishnah in Nidarim. And that's the simple reading, that's the reading that they're using here for the rabbis. The rabbis say, mutal, because it's nidrei onsim, it's not even a neder. And Rabbi Shimon, who says it's asur, is karavasi. He says it's asur unless you undo the vow. But without undoing your vow, it's not permitted, even if it's onus, because again, we don't want people taking vows and they're just non-existent, and then other people will see and think that I can just take vows and not keep them. So that puts this in a totally different category. Okay, so the first one saw it as the exact same case as case number 2 and said it's a mistake, just switch the approaches. Case number 2 saw it as the same logic of case number 2. It's just that one was going into Nisirut and one was how to get out of Nisirut. But it was the same logic. It's just you end up being stricter or more lenient depending on what your status is, in terms of where you are right now. Are you a Nazir or are you not yet a Nazir? Case number 3 says this is a totally different machloket. Has to do with a case where you were honest. It's a different case entirely. It was a case where you did accept full Nazir, but you had to become impure to dead, or you had to drink wine. And then it's a totally different machloket. Are we strict just because we don't want people to be taking Nedarim not so seriously, or not? So that was 3 approaches. Now we're moving on to a different Mishnah. Hareini Nazir, v'alai legalech Nazir. I take upon Nazirut and I say 2 things. Number 1, I'm going to be a Nazir. Number 2, I'm going to pay for the sacrifices of some other Nazir. V'shama chavero v'amar v'ani v'alai legalech Nazir. And you hear what I said. And you said, me too. And I'm also going to shave a Nazir. So right now we're going to assume, although the Gemara is going to ask all this, sounds like you're saying, me too, I'm going to be a Nazir as well. Alai l'galech Nazir, and I'm also going to take upon myself to pay for the sacrifices of some other Nazir. This is the cute part of the Mishnah. If they were smart, what would they do? They would migalchim zeh zeh. They would each pay for the other's sacrifice, in which case I don't really have to take out money out of pocket. Right? I promised, I committed to give to some other Nazir. So I'll give to this Nazir. He'll give to me, and then I won't have to put out money for both my sacrifices and for someone else's. Right? That's like a smart way of doing this. But if not, so a few points about this before we move on. Number 1, why are they telling us to be smart and you could do this and all that? What they want to say is, when I took upon Nazirut, and this is going to come up more in tomorrow's daf, when I took upon Nazirut, what happened? You weren't a Nazir yet. I said, I'm going to take on the sacrifices of another Nazir. So you see here that I can take on yours, even though at the time I made my statement, you weren't even a Nazir yet. It doesn't mean when I say I'm going to take upon myself to do the sacrifices of another, it had to be someone who was a Nazir at the time. I can fulfill my commitment from someone who later becomes a Nazir. Okay, that's going to come up because we're going to compare it to the laws of shlichut and sending a messenger, and we're going to see that they're not exactly the same thing. Number 2, this reminds me of a few Mishnah we've seen before, one of them being in Ketubot, where there were 2 women who were taken hostage, and they each were going to testify about the other, that she wasn't raped. And there's a concern that one is doing it like tit for tat. Okay. And or a Kohen is testifying about his fellow Kohen, he's a Kohen, or and then there was like a tit for tat here about each one possibly lying because each one was doing it for the other, which is kind of a reverse approach here, right? Here it's saying good to do for one another, and there it was saying not. And the other thing it reminds me of is in Megillah, there's a case about 2 rabbis who would mechalfe sudate lahadade. They would each, I would bring my Sudat Purim to you, and you would bring your Sudat Purim to me. And there's different interpretations of why they're telling us this. Was it just, okay, they, like some people say they actually went to each other's houses, 1 year him, 1 year by them, home and home series. But other people say no, what they were doing is they were fulfilling their obligation, Mishloach Manot, by giving a Suda to the other. They were so poor, there's actually 2 brothers, and one would give one his Purim Suda and the other one would give the other. That way they didn't have to spend any extra money. Because in any case, you have to spend money for your meal. So this way you fulfill Mishloach Manot and eating your Suda by without spending any money out of pocket. That's very similar to this. Okay, now the Gemara is going to start off with a big linguistic argument here. Or question. When the person says ani, in this case, you said, and me, and I'm going to take upon myself to the korban of someone else. I made 2 statements, and then you said 2 statements. What if you only said ve'ani? I said I'm going to do this and this, and you said and me. So it's really a question. If you just said ani, what's it applying to? Is it only applying to one or the other? And if it's applying to one or the, right, if it's not applying to both, to which one is it applying? So the question is ve'ani mahu. So if you said just and me, ani ve'ani, the words and me, akule tibura mashma, is it on the entire thing that I said when you said and me? Or odilma apalgi dibura mashma, are you only referring to part of what I said? And im timtzelomar apalga dibura mashma, and if you're only talking about part of what I said, aresho asefer, you're talking about the first part or the second part. So they say, well, it's pretty obvious from our Mishnah. Tashma, let's look at our Mishnah. Ve'ani ve'alai legalech nazir, imayu preklim megalchim ze'etzeh. So there he said, you said both statements, ve'ani and alai legalech nazir. So midika'amar ve'ani ve'alai, because the Mishnah went out of the way to say both statements, shma mina ve'ani apalga dibura, it sounds like it's only on part. And Amre, so to which they say, Amre in apaga de dibura mashma. You're right. Ani must be only partial. But miu aresha asefa. It's a bit of a strange question because it's kind of obvious. But anyway, they're asking it and they'll explain themselves. Is it on the, when you said ani, it's obviously not enough because otherwise, why do you have to say the second part? So it's only on part, but which part, first or second? Well, mina, from the wording of the Mishnah, it's quite obvious. Since the second part of what you said is, and I will take upon myself sacrifices, obviously then va'ani is referring to the part where you said I'm going to be a Nazir, right? Shema mina, va'ani al tchilati bura mashma. Okay. What they said is no rocket science. This would have been obvious had they not said this, which is the reason why you said ve'ani and va'alai legalech Nazir is to say ve'ani refers to the first part only, I'm going to be a Nazir, and va'alai legalech is saying, and I'm going to bring the korbanot. And you had to say that because without that, it wouldn't have worked. So now the Gemara says, wait a minute. Just lost my place. Amar le Rav Huna, right? So from there, they said, Shema mina al tchilati bura mashma, must be referring to the beginning. Amar le Rav Huna b'rei Rav Yoshua le Rava. Rav Huna said, the son of Rabbi Yoshua says to Rava, wait a minute. Mimai dehachi. How do you know it's like this? I could say otherwise. Le'olam e'melacha v'ani akuli dibura. I really think ani. If you just said ani, not like the Mishnah, you just said the words v'ani, you would have been would have been referring to everything I said. Because if I say something and you say me too, you mean exactly what I said. V'im mishum ve'alai, Maika amar ve'alai, Maika amar. So if you're going to question me and say, well, then why did the Mishnah bother telling me ve'alai legalech Nazir? What did he add by that? If it really didn't need to be added, well, ve'alai b'ha milta. You wanted to strengthen it, and I'm really going to do even the second thing. But it's not that you really needed it. Why do I think that I'm right in this? Because look at the next Mishnah, which we haven't seen yet. If you don't say that, you say I'm going to take the sacrifices of half a Nazir. Okay, notice the next of that Mishnah. That Mishnah is talking about one statement I made. And then you said two things. You said ve'ani, and you confirmed what you were saying v'ani about. You said Nazir. There aren't two things to say one is referring to one and one is referring to the other. What were you saying? And I will really do this. You were just strengthening. Here also you're saying, I got this. I'm really going to do it. It's just a word of strength. So Rav Huna goes against Rava and says, I don't get your explanation. I don't think it's proof. Because the next Mishnah disproves your point. To which Rava says, no. I'm going to end with Rava's proof that I am right. Because my way makes a lot of sense. Because in our Mishnah, you needed it. And then the next Mishnah, it wasn't really necessary, but they added it for parallel language, right? Often the Mishnah don't like to be literary, right? This one said this, so they use that language there. And therefore, Tani Seifa de lo tzricha mishum reisha de tzricha. Since the reisha needed those words v'alai, without that, you wouldn't have accepted the whole thing because ani is only on part of what I said. Therefore, in the next case where you didn't really need to say it, but it said it just because it's matching the language in this Mishnah. But reisha lo tzricha seifa lo tzricha tani reisha de lo tzricha tani seifa de lo tzricha. But if you didn't think it was necessary in our Mishnah, then you're going to have it unnecessary in our Mishnah and unnecessary in the next Mishnah. That makes absolutely no sense. At least it should be needed somewhere. And then it's just duplicated. But there's no reason to have unnecessary words in both Mishnayot. And therefore, Rava reproves his point that it must be ve'ani would only be on part, and you would need the alai to say, right, alai legalech Nazir would confirm the second part. So we saw two approaches to the wording here and what it means. The next daf is a really fascinating daf about shlichut, sending messengers. We see someone who sends someone to betroth a random woman, which is quite, right, we have a lot of quite odd situations in these dapim. Anyway, with that, I will end and wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.